Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen who were very unhappy because they had no children. So unhappy that it was hard to imagine. They visited all the healing waters of the world, made vows and pilgrimages, they fasted. In other words, they were ready to try anything, but to no avail. At last, the queen got pregnant and had a daughter. There was a very fine christening. All the 7 fairies of the whole kingdom were invited to the palace to be the little princess's godmothers. As was the custom of the fairies in those days, each would bless the goddaughter with a special talent, so that the princess had all the talents imaginable. After the christening was over, everyone returned to the king's palace for a great feast. Magnificent cases made of pure gold were prepared for each fairy. Each case contained a finely made golden spoon, a knife, and a fork set with diamonds and rubies. Just as all godmothers sat down at the table, another fairy came into the hall. She was not invited because nobody had heard from her in a very long time. The king immediately ordered to serve the table for her. But he could not give her a finely made golden case because only 7 had been made. The furious fairy decided that she was dishonored on purpose.
So that's how you treat me, the king? Just wait. You will be sorry that you have dishonored me.
One of the fairies overheard her muttering and suspected that the evil fairy might give the little princess some unlucky talent. So she hid herself behind the tapestry near the cradle as soon as the guests left the table. She hoped that she would speak last and undo as much of the evil as she could. In the meantime, the fairies began to grant their talents to the princess.
The princess will be the most beautiful person in the world. She will have the luck of an angel. She will be the most graceful. The princess will dance perfectly. She will sing like a nightingale. The princess will play all kinds of musical instruments with perfection.
The angry fairy's turn came next.
The princess will pierce her hand with a spindle and die of the wound.
This terrible prophecy made everyone tremble. There wasn't a single person in the room who was not crying. At this very instant, the last fairy came out from behind the tapestry and said in a loud voice,
Please don't cry, dear king and queen. Your daughter will not die. I don't have enough power to completely undo the curse of the evil fairy. The princess will indeed pierce her hand with a spindle, but instead of dying, she will only fall into a deep sleep, which will last 100 years, at the end of which a king's son will come and awake her with a kiss.
To avoid the curse foretold by the evil fairy, the king had immediately issued an order.
To all the subjects of His Majesty the King, from now on it is strictly prohibited to spin with a distaff and a spindle, or to have a spindle in a house, and will be penalized by death.
15 or 16 years have passed. One day the royal family visited one of their country villas. The young princess was so excited that she ran from one room to another. At last she came into a little garret at the top of the tower, where an old woman was spinning with her spindle. This old woman had never heard of the king's orders against spindles.
What are you doing, old woman?
I am spinning, my little child.
The old woman did not recognize the princess.
Wow, you're so handy with it. How do you do it? May I try? Let me see if I can do it too.
Having said that, the princess snatched the spindle from the old woman's hands. Either because she was too quick and heedless, or maybe the curse of the fairy had been so strong.
Ouch! It pricked me! Ouch!
So the young princess had pierced her hand with the spindle and fell down, lifeless.
My child, what is wrong with you? Somebody help! Help!
People came in from everywhere. They threw water upon the princess's face, unlaced her, rubbed her hands and rubbed her temples with rosemary water, but nothing would bring her to her senses. Finally, the king came up upon hearing all the noise and remembered the curse of the evil fairy. The fairy's prediction has come true. Carry the princess into the finest room of the palace and lay her upon a bed embroidered with gold and silver. Laying in her bed, the sleeping princess was as beautiful as an angel. Her sleep did not dim her beauty. Her cheeks were rosy, and her lips the color of coral. Only her eyes were shut. One could hear her soft breathing, so it was clear that she did not pass away, but only fell asleep. Let her sleep quietly until the time comes for her to awake. The good fairy, who had saved the life of the princess, even if by condemning her to 100-year sleep, was visiting the kingdom of Matakin 12,000 miles away. She quickly found out about the accident thanks to her little assistant dwarf who had 7-mile boots. Wearing these boots, one could walk 7 miles in one step.
My lady! The prophecy had been fulfilled. The princess had pierced her hand and is now asleep.
The fairy rushed back at once, and an hour later arrived to the castle in a fiery chariot drawn by dragons. The king came to meet her and helped her out of her chariot. Welcome, my dear lady.
You have done well, keeping her away from prying eyes. We must think about the future now. Imagine how scared she will feel when she awakes all alone in this old place 100 years later with no one at her side. However, I know what we need to do.
The fairy touched everything in the palace with her wand, except for the king and the queen. She touched governesses, maids of honor, ladies of the bedchamber, gentlemen, officers, stewards, cooks, undercooks, kitchen maids, guards with their porters, pages, and footmen. She touched all the horses that were in the stables, along with the grooms, the great dogs in the outward court, and little Puff, too, the princess's little dog, which was lying on the bed. As soon as the fairy did that, they all fell asleep, not to wake again until their mistress did, so that they will be ready to serve her when she needed them. The very spits full of partridges and ferrets roasting on the fire fell asleep, and the fire itself as well. All this happened in a moment. Fairies don't take long to cast their spells. The king and the queen now kissed their dear child farewell and went out of the palace.
Hear, hear, all subjects of the king! Nobody should come near the enchanted castle!
These orders were not necessary, since in a quarter of an hour's time, a vast number of trees, great and small, bushes and brambles grew all around the castle, twining one another, so that neither man nor beast could pass through. Only the very tops of the towers could be seen from afar. Every person in the kingdom knew that this was the work of the fairy in order to protect the princess from the prying eyes of strangers while she slept. After 100 years have passed, the son of the king from another reigning dynasty was hunting on that side of the country. The young man saw distant towers in the middle of a great thick wood and asked around the locals of them.
Whose is that castle in the forest? Who lives there? Old walls and ruins, my lord. It's an old haunted castle. You'd better forget about it. It's a cursed place, my lord. All the witches of the country hold their black masses there. Don't even think of going near it.
Nah, old wives' tales. Everybody knows it's an ogre's dwelling. No one can follow him, for he alone has the power to make his way through the wood.
The prince did not know who to believe until an old countryman spoke to him.
May I speak, your royal highness? More than 50 years since I heard from my father that there sleeps the most beautiful princess in the world. She must sleep there for 100 years until a king's son will wake her, for whom she was reserved.
If so, I wish to see her with my own eyes.
The young prince immediately thought that he could awake the mysterious beauty. Pushed on by love and the desire of glory, he resolved at once to visit the castle.
To the castle!
As soon as he arrived near the wood, all the great trees, the bushes, and brambles gave way to let him pass through. The prince walked up to the castle at the end of a large clearing. None of his servants could follow him, because the trees closed up again as soon as he passed through them.
My lord, the bushes! They're barring our way!
That did not stop the prince from continuing on his way.
Stay here! I'll be back soon!
He walked up to the castle. The young prince was very brave and full of love. Soon he came into a spacious outer court, and what he saw was enough to freeze his blood. A frightful silence reigned over the castle. The image of death was everywhere. All he could see were outstretched bodies of dead men and animals. The prince examined the ruby faces and pimpled noses of the porters and immediately realized that they were only asleep. Some drops of wine remained in their goblets, showing plainly that they had fallen asleep while drinking. He then crossed a court paved with marble, went up the stairs, and came into the guard chamber, where guards were standing in their ranks with their muskets upon their shoulders and snoring with all their might. He went through several rooms full of gentlemen and ladies, some standing and others sitting, but all were asleep. Finally, he came into a gilded chamber where he saw upon a bed with open curtains the most beautiful sight he had ever seen.
What a beauty.
The princess, about 15 or 16 years of age, was so beautiful one might think she had something divine in her face. The prince approached her with trembling and admiration, fell down upon his knees before the bed, and kissed the beautiful princess. The curse had finally been lifted, and the princess awoke. She looked at the prince with eyes more tender than could have expected. It was their first encounter, along with the first secret kiss.
Is it you, my prince? I see you are well worth the wait.
The prince, charmed with these words, and even more with the manner in which they were spoken, did not know how to express his joy and gratitude. He instantly acknowledged his feelings.
Oh, mistress of the enchanted castle, I love you with all my heart.
Even though their conversation was very awkward, they liked each other very much. Where there is much love, there is little eloquence. The prince was shyer than the princess, and no wonder. The princess had plenty of time to think of what to say to him, because the good fairy had given the princess very pleasant dreams about her future love.
My prince, I think I saw you in one of my dreams.
In the meantime, all the palace had woken up with the princess, and everyone went about their business. The servants were ready to die of hunger, while their lady talked with her love for more than 4 hours.
If you please, your royal highness, the meal is served. My dear prince, can you imagine that we were speaking for 4 hours?
And I didn't even say a half of what I had to say.
I think we have to go.
The prince helped the princess to rise. She was magnificently dressed, but His Royal Highness took care not to tell her that she was dressed like his great-grandmother and had a high collar. She looked not in the slightest less charming and beautiful because of that. They went into the great mirrored hall, where they dined and were served by the officers of the princess's household. The violins and oboes played old tunes that had not been played for 100 years. After supper, without losing any time, the prince married the beautiful princess in the chapel of the castle. In 2 years, the prince and the princess had 2 children. The eldest daughter was named Aurora, for she was as beautiful as a morning dawn. The younger son was named Day, for he was even more handsome than his sister.